Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Fern Tiger, and I'm on the faculty in urban studies here at UW-T. We've had a pretty exciting morning and lunchtime speaker, so I have no reason to doubt that this panel will not continue in that trend. I think what we learned already is that all of these things are connected. The economic development people had a hard time talking about economic development without referring to housing, and I think the housing people are going to have an equally difficult time talking without discussing jobs as well. We've got a really great panel, and I'm going to just tell you one little piece of trivia as I introduce just them by name, and then I'm going to do it different than the other panels. I'm going to introduce each speaker as they come up to speak. But I just want to, this is, to my right is Steve O'Connor, and he was born in the Bronx, born and raised in the Bronx, New York. To his right is Michael Pyatok, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. And then to his right is Michael Mirra, born and raised in Queens, New York, and I'm told that Loren's grandparents lived in Manhattan. So we have 4 of the 5 New York boroughs represented, and New Yorkers always say it's, only 6 degrees of separation. I too, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. So a big hand for New York, I guess, here. And we all left.
And we all moved to less dense regions.
Yeah, we all left and came west, I guess. Anyway, the first speaker on our panel is Steve O'Connor. Steve is the director of the Runstad Center for Real Estate Studies at UW in Seattle. He's a 30-year veteran of the real estate industry, and he's used every form of conventional and subsidized debt and equity instrument that is known. He's a nationally recognized expert in real estate development, in affordable housing, and community development. And prior to coming to UW in 2012, he was the CEO to a number of private and nonprofit organizations where he spearheaded what he refers to as true public-private partnerships, and I hope we're going to ask him, or maybe he's going to tell us, why he uses the word true in that description. And those partnerships resulted in the creation of thousands of housing units and innovative social programs for low and moderate income families. Steve holds a master's degree from Harvard and a PhD in planning and public policy from the Blaustein School of Planning at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He was an adjunct professor at Rutgers for more than 20 years, where he taught about housing and national housing policy, site planning, and real estate development. He's been the CEO of the Newhouse Group, which was his own real estate consulting firm, and there he worked with both nonprofit and for-profit developers around the country to attract and capture debt and equity resources necessary for project feasibility. And prior to this, he was the senior VP for the Community Development Trust in New York, where he got national attention for sourcing new investments to preserve the affordability of thousands of housing units that were threatened by conversion to market rate housing. And so without further ado, I'm going to have Steve speak with us.
Thank you, Fern. Hi, everybody. Great to be down in Tacoma. Just a little song verse there for you, because, I have that unfortunate ability to, every time a word comes up, I think of a song. So from Northern California all the way to Tacoma, if there was cocktails here, I would start to sing. So anyway, thank you, Fern, again, and thank you, Ali, for inviting me here. Fern's absolutely right. I mean, the continuity of conversation that's taken place this morning, I'm going to try to reinforce just a little bit here in terms of affordability. But one of the things I always try to stress more than anything else is that there is no silver bullet. You just can't go out, you just can't build affordable housing. The elements that all need to come together relative to public school education, transportation, jobs, et cetera, kind of calculates and quantifies all the elements that are necessary to be a successful community and have successful programs like this. So I am a relative newcomer here to Washington, came here in 2012. I've done affordable housing most of my life, and it's a really, really hard thing to do. I tell our students that if you can build affordable housing, you can do anything in real estate, okay? Because the difference between the population that you want to serve, what they can pay, and what it costs to build the housing is significant. And what you have to do is be very, very adept at being able to try and capture and attract the resources necessary to fill that gap. So, you can't walk into Home Depot and say, I'm doing affordable housing, can you tell me where the affordable 2x4s are? Doesn't happen. So it takes years sometimes to kind of cobble together the resources necessary. We typically call it lasagna financing because there are 6 or 7, maybe even more sources that are necessary to be able to achieve project feasibility. Standing up in front of community development, or no, not community development, but communities in general, to be able to say we want to build affordable housing has always been really hard, mostly from the NIMBY perspective. There's a lot of misconceptions about who's moving in. The folks that are going to move in, they're going to have a lot of kids. They're going to put a stress and a strain on the school system. They're going to do this, they're going to, all of that stuff. Okay? What we've seen lately is that a lot of cities are now starting to grapple with the issue. All right? So if you do just a simple little Google search, all right, on any given day, and this was just 1 week, okay, of Google searches, you see that cities around the country are really starting to think about this issue because, we're experiencing it at least here in King County, all right? I mean, trying to come down to Tacoma at certain hours of the day and night, really tough, I lived in New Jersey and commuted into New York in shorter times than to come down here. And a lot of that is the search for affordable housing. But a lot of it also is that, I've often said it would be wonderful if a single person or a single mom and dad, couple of kids, maybe they work at Amazon, wouldn't it be wonderful if they had an opportunity to be able to walk to work, take public transportation to work? In many cases, they don't because they have to travel great distances to be able to find something that's affordable. In many cases, they're making that decision, that discretionary decision, to be able to go out and try to find some place that's going to be valuable to their kids' education. Because, to the points that everybody has been making, people are flocking, all the Amazonians are flocking into Seattle. That's clear, and I'll show you some slides here in terms of what's happening construction-wise. But, once they do start forming households, and they do start having kids, are they going to stay there? Are they going to stay there and put their kids in $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 a year private educations? Or are they going to go someplace and try to find someplace that's going to be more, suburban living, quality of life, quality of schools, et cetera, et cetera. So it's going to be an interesting phenomenon to watch over the next couple of years. So one of the things I wanted to bring to your attention is that, and again, people are talking about this specific to Tacoma. What are the resources? What are the attractions? What do you have as assets that you can leverage? And one of the things I'd like to take a look at as well is what's happening on the federal level. And you go, oh shit, well, who cares about that? It's down in Washington, they're idiots, but boom, okay? Well, the fact of the matter is that when we came out of the Great Recession, and we had all the fallout on that, yesterday they announced that the home ownership rate in the country is at 63.9%, which is the lowest it's been in 20 years, okay? Now, the good news to that statistic is that the home ownership rate also fluctuates because we've had a fairly significant increase in household formation, all right? So that's the good news. And it is the formation of new households which is the economic engine that drives housing, okay? So what is the government doing? Well, they're starting a new program with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, just announced about 60 days ago, where they're going to be offering 3% down payments, okay? Now, don't confuse this with FHA. Okay, FHA is still a program, 3.5%, and it's a very difficult program to get through because houses have to be qualified for that. They have certain, specified appraisers, et cetera, et cetera. But for all of you millennials out there, and you just heard the last speaker talk about how difficult it's going to be to buy a house and get into a house, and you look at the housing stock that might be here in Tacoma, all right? In the fourth quarter in Pierce County, the median household value, the median price of a resale home in Pierce County in the fourth quarter was $233,000. Yeah, that's the median. So if you take the 3%, you got to come up with less than $7,000 to buy the house. Okay? Now, part of the problem with the millennials, and the name is starting to get on my nerves a little bit. Because I have, my son's 32, my daughter's 30. So my son just got engaged. Lovely young lady, an attorney, with $192,000 in student loans. Okay? It's one of the problems that your generation is having with that level of student debt, being able to move into this marketplace. All right? So this might be a way to be able to get you there. So the quick economics of this, $7,000 down. Now, fortunately, I'm a boomer. I'm a young old. All right? Thank you. So I can write my son a $7,000 check. I can write him a $10,000 check. Say, hey, buddy, go buy the house. Go do it. Okay? Now, the great thing about affordability, particularly in this environment, is that we have had historically low interest rates. Okay? So if you pull off what is today's rate at 4.19% off a bank rate, you come up with a principal and interest payment of $1,100, okay, for that median priced home in Pierce County. Now, because the down payment is so low, you have to pay private mortgage insurance, which is essentially the guarantee that you're going to give the lender in the event that you lose your job, sickness, whatever, you can't pay the mortgage anymore, you go out, the insurance steps in, pays the difference between what you owe with the house and the balance on the loan. So then the PMI, okay, that's the insurance premium, taxes and insurance, so you're all in at $1,591 for a house, a median price house in Pierce County. This program now exists right now. Okay? So if you take the qualification ratios that a lot of bankers and mortgage people use, okay, you essentially need $53,000 in income to be able to qualify for the house. Okay? So that could be household income, that could be joint income, it could be family income, right? So what's the median, and again, Joel talked about this in terms of median multiples, all right? Your income as a multiple of what the house cost, all right? What's the median household income in Pierce County for household of four, family of four? What is it? It's $67,000. All right? So, do you have enough income, you know, to be able to buy the house? I think so. So again, affordable housing, affordable place to live. If you can fix the education system here, and believe me, the one in King County is even worse. All right? And you can sit there and have a significant competitive advantage. You start to leverage these things. You know, you talk about who's going to come down here and build a Class A office space. Well, somebody who's going to be able to realize that sooner or later, it's going to get too expensive to attract people into Seattle, or the congestion will scare them away, and they're going to be looking for alternatives. The worst joke I've heard since I've been here in 2 years is that the affordable housing plan in King County is Pierce County. Okay. You've heard this. Income, big issue here, right? All of a sudden, a day or two ago, some state legislator wants to wipe out the $15 an hour minimum wage and let the municipalities, you know, be able to, or set a statewide minimum wage. So let's go to income relative to affordability. So it was big news, national news, $15 an hour. So if you're working 40 hours a week, I have 5 minutes? Thank you, holy mackerel. $15 an hour, 40 hours a week, $600, okay? Work 52 weeks a year, $31,200. Government says we shouldn't pay more than 30% of our income on housing, so we have $9,360 available for housing. So with that, anything above that, the government would consider us to be cost burdened. So we take that, we divide it by 12, $780. So go find an apartment in Seattle for $780. Okay, not happening. So King County, the average is $1,270. It's probably up already because that's from third quarter. So what they do is they calculate the housing wage. How many hours would you have to work at minimum wage to be able to afford that rent? Okay, and it's $15 an hour. Let me tell you one thing about the state of Washington in general. Outside of the Puget Sound, this is an affordable place to live. Okay? Outside of the coast, you know, that we derogatorily say the flyover states, it's a pretty affordable place to live. All right? So, but with all that's going on right now in terms of home building and construction and things of that nature, I was curious to see what was the past in terms of Washington's experience. So in terms of existing home sales, all right, You can see that in '07, it was about 130,000 homes a year sold in the state of Washington. Today, we're at 93, even with all the boom that's going on. Building permits, all right? In the earlier years, you can see that single families outpaced multifamily. You look more recently, more multifamily permits than single family permits, okay? But again, we are nowhere near where we were at the top of the market, all right? 2005, 6, and 7, about 78,000 building permits issued in 3 years. It took another 6 years to be able to issue 80,000, okay? So again, the frenzy that's going on in certain parts of this state, and particularly a little bit further north of us, is nowhere near historical highs. Home prices. Again, look where we were in fourth quarter '05, fourth quarter '06. We were up close to $300,000 statewide, okay? Now we're down to like 260. So we still haven't gotten back up there. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is housing affordability. Because again, Joel talked about the income multiple. What we try to do is calculate exactly what I did for you 5 minutes ago, 2 minutes. And that is, we look at the median income in each county and evaluate it to the median priced home. And we assume certain metrics. And maybe we can argue whether or not they're the correct metrics. But what we say is that if someone can afford 20% down payment at the prevailing interest rate and a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, and if a median income can afford the median price house, then the index is at 100, okay? So you can see that statewide, we're up above 180, which means the household has 80% more income needed to be able to buy the median priced home. So this state is affordable. The outlier is areas that are a little bit further north of us, all right? So I didn't get into a lot of stuff there in terms of affordability, but again, what I would want to leave you with is there are no easy answers to this. It is all about the connectedness. If we got a light rail system or some kind of a rail system or a better public transportation system to take people up and down, people would live here and work there because there's a better housing stock here, right? 70% of the housing stock in Seattle is single family. Most people don't know that. And the problems that you have there relative to density, nobody wants their neighborhood to change. And yet when you look at, as a proxy, the number of new vehicle licenses that are applied for in the state, King County is averaging about 9,000 to 10,000 new licensees a month, right? Now, what the net number is, I'm not exactly sure. But there is a lot of people coming into this place. And the issues and the challenges that we have are regional. So we can't do up there and not do down here without fixing the whole problem. And it's one of the reasons why I'm delighted I've had the opportunity to get to meet Ali, so that hopefully between the two campuses, we can kind of come together and try to figure out whether or not we can provide solutions to a challenge that is difficult, but not impossible. So, thank you.
Our next speaker is Michael Pyatok, who we're going to call Mike for the panel, since we have two Michaels on the panel. Mike has been an architect and a professor of architectural design for 4 decades, teaching housing and urban design at Berkeley, Harvard, University of Oregon, University of Texas, and for the past 25 years at the University of Washington in Seattle. He is a graduate of Pratt Institute in New York and of the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. Mike's been a Fulbright Fellow in Helsinki, Finland, and a Loeb Fellow at Harvard. In 1995, he was elected to the AIA College of Fellows and was very recently awarded the Thomas Jefferson Award for Public Architecture. In 2001, Harvard appointed him its Bucksbaum Professor of Architecture, and in the same year, Residential Architect magazine featured him as Architect of the Year in recognition of the quality design he's brought to affordable housing. He's been recognized as a thought leader in the development industry and named by Builder magazine as one of the 50 most influential people in the U.S. housing industry. His firm has designed more than 35,000 units of housing for lower-income households in the U.S. and abroad, often using participatory design methods to engage communities, and they've won countless design awards for these projects. He's also an architect who writes, so he has many articles under his name, and has co-authored the book, Good Neighbors, Affordable Family Housing, which is credited with setting the bar for affordable housing design for the past 20 years. More recently, he authored a chapter in Beyond Zuccotti Park called Residential Space versus Civic Space, a Case for Populist Design, and is currently completing a chapter on the past, present, and future trends of housing design in the U.S. in a book whose title, he says, is very academic and way too long to note, so I won't. Okay, Michael. You could just do that.
Just do that.
Yeah. Or you
Okay.
could do that.
Yeah. Okay. A whole bunch of issues have been raised so far today, and what I was going to talk about in my brief 15 minutes of fame here was to try to link the issues of transportation and housing affordability. Cozy by design, I never use the word density anymore. It's gotten a bad name, the D word. So I'd like to talk about cozy communities and how we can make them more livable. And Tacoma is a very livable community, but it does have its shortcomings. And that has to do with the distance from jobs. And we heard a lot about that today, about how much moving of bodies through space goes on around here just to connect where people are living to where they work, and all the other functions in life that they have to take care of. And one of the important things that has to be recognized is that when we talk about the cost of housing, transportation is an integral part of that. It's part of the housing expense. An interesting study done about 10 years ago by the National Housing Conference linked the two, studying 21 metropolitan regions, with a particular focus on the lower income folks in those communities and how much they were spending on their housing and transportation costs together. Those who are living in the inner city, and we're talking about people now whose incomes are at 50% of AMI or under. People at that income level, when living in the inner city, where they had some access to public transit along with their housing expenses, were spending 54% of their income really on their housing location. If they got forced to live out in the suburbs, or chose to, with the mythological quest for the good life out in the suburbs that we heard earlier from Joel, the other Brooklynite, they're now forced to spend 66, 2/3 of their income is just on that choice of living out there in the suburbs with their transportation costs now to move their bodies around. And sometimes and often it's not by choice. They're just forced out because the inner city gets too expensive. So it varies region by region. And if you're forced to live even further out, the impact is even more severe. 70% of their income. So they got 30% left after their housing and moving their body through space costs. They got only 30% left for food, clothing, education, and all the other essentials in life like healthcare. So it really is a very serious issue, the lack of good transit systems in any region, particularly so for lower income communities. If you look at the so-called levels of coziness of different cities in the US, I call these the bottom feeders, these more recent Western cities that were totally auto-oriented. They got 2,700, 3,200 people per square mile. Up here in the Pacific Northwest, it's a little bit better. But Tacoma is still down there with only 4,100 people per square mile. And we'll get a moment into what does that mean on the ground. What does it mean when we use numbers like that? And then the older cities, Boston, San Francisco, Brooklyn at 37,000, Manhattan at 65,000. Those are big numbers. And there's probably the reasons why all of us and grandparents eventually migrated out of there to other regions of the country. So Joel is right in that respect. But looking at the Tacoma number, what does that mean, 4,100 people per square mile? Well, About 35% of urban land there is actually in the residential districts. When you subtract out all the area for streets and highways and parks and churches and parking lots and office buildings and shopping malls, et cetera, only about a third of the land is really occupied by housing. So what it means then is really that in those housing districts, it's more like 12,300 people in Tacoma are living per square mile. And how does that convert then to dwellings? Well, if we have an average of about 2.1 people, according to census, per dwelling, per household, you're getting about 5,900 dwellings per square mile. And what does that mean? In acres, 9 dwelling units per acre is the average density of Tacoma. Not very high. And my friends tell me in the transportation industry, you need maybe 15 per acre to have a good bus system. Good functioning bus system. You don't have to wait long periods of time, and you got lots of routes and lots of choices. So Tacoma is kind of under par when it comes to good transit, even internally. And Ron Sims made that point this morning. Concentrate on improving your internal transit system to make the city more affordable. What I was going to do here now, as shock value to folks from Tacoma, is concentrate on this 3/4 square mile area of the downtown. That's 1 mile wide, 3/4 of a mile high, from Sprague over to Pacific, and about 10 blocks up in north-south, 5 blocks north-south. There's a community in the U.S. exactly that same size. It's a neighborhood. And it has 65,000 people. It has a third of the city of Tacoma living in that same area I just showed you in the downtown. I mean, that's incredible. And yet, for some people, it's still a pretty livable place. The coziness level is 85,000 people per square mile, and there's Tacoma. So it's 20 times more cozy. How can anybody possibly live under those circumstances? Well, if you take a closer look from the air at what this neighborhood looks like, one of those blocks, you see a lot of green. I mean, you see a lot of rooftops, but you also see a lot of green in the streets and the backyards. And if you look more closely at the streets, nothing's taller than 4 stories. In fact, there are 2- and 3-story buildings in that neighborhood. And nearly all of those buildings are walk-ups. There are no elevators, except in a few apartment buildings that are taller than this. And then if you look in the backyards, they're all pretty green too. They're growing food, in fact, back there. So at that level of density, the 80,000, whatever it was per square mile, people are living fairly comfortably. Of course, what's happened is it's such a popular place. And the retail, by the way, runs through on all the avenues. So you're a half a block away from retail at any point. So you have all the things you want. And even the retail streets are tree-lined. So it's a very comfortable neighborhood. It's got lots of schools, it's got libraries, and all those white lines lacing through there, those are bus routes. Bus routes are making that place live, carrying people to where they need to go. And there, of course, there are 5 subway stations in there as well. That certainly helps. The other important ingredient making that neighborhood work is the 1 square mile park right next to it, Prospect Park and Homestead Park. So making that 100 units to the acre, whatever it is, a lot more livable because of the adjacency to that open space. So I had 4 ways over the years I've working with neighborhoods trying to introduce more affordable housing. You got 1 strike against you already, because often the income level that you're introducing is half or less than the income level of the people who live there. And you're asking them also to accept the idea that this housing is going to be at a more cozier, it's going to be at a cozier level, because to make it work financially, you got to put more households per acre than what might be there in the existing neighborhood. Neighborhood-specific plans. Oh, look what happens to the lettering when you switch computers. Basically, these are the toolkits that are out there for planning professionals and for cities. A specific plan, basically, a city hires professionals who then work with that neighborhood to come up with the zoning and design guidelines for that neighborhood to allow for growth and expansion and diversity, but under the tutelage and direction of the people who actually live there. Much more sensible way to go than any top-down strategies, and much more sensible than just bringing in developers, with their expectations and desires and their bottom lines, forcing it upon neighborhoods. And look at that, it's not even coming out there. But fitting into the context is another important ingredient. Participatory design, of course, I said from the start. So engaging the community and understanding the culture and what domesticity means to that locality and designing to meet that is a way of gently bringing people along into a world that's a little more cozy, and in this case in Tacoma, to get better transit. Some scenes of these kinds of workshops, real hands-on workshops, and I challenge private developers to undertake this too from the start and not concoct what they want and then bring it to a neighborhood and hope that it'll fly. Start from the very beginning with possible options that they could explore with modeling kits so they could see what happens when you talk about 30, 40, 50 units per acre. What can you do with the open space? What can you do with the parking? So physically feel and see it. And I'll end with just 4 examples of projects that came out of that process that tried to bring communities along and accepting incomes that considerably less than those that might have been around it. This one is actually right here in Tacoma that we did for Mercy Housing about 12 years ago. This is about 60 units to the acre. It's a few blocks from here. And you'd never know it because it's 2 stories from the street on one side, and it's about 4 stories on the other side, but it's stepped back. It steps with the hill. And in the center of the community, there's a level courtyard for everybody who lives there to enjoy. And then it's clothed in a vocabulary that's comfortable and known to people who live in Tacoma, the old tradition of craftsman homes. Here's another example at about 50 to the acre, being introduced into the heart of Palo Alto. This is a neighborhood called Professorville. It's where the homes are at 2 million up, single-family homes, introducing low-income rental housing at 50 units to the acre into that neighborhood. But by going through that process of engagement with the community, with everybody seeing what can work and what can't work, and helping to shape how it could fit in, it successfully, got completed. And everyone in the neighborhood loves it and has won lots of design awards. I end with 2 very interesting demonstrations of what higher levels of coziness could be, and accomplished by the indigenous people of the United States, not by the Anglos, not by the immigrants, but by Native Americans. This is an example of about 55 units to the acre above a clinic, an affordable clinic, 3 blocks from a BART station, all packaged onto 2/3 of an acre. And it was the first opportunity for the Native American community in the East Bay to express their presence as they call themselves, urban Indians. So they raised enough money to include the works of art from a number of different Native American artists. And this last one, of all places in Phoenix, where the average density or level of coziness is 3.5 units per acre. This was a Native American organization called Native American Connections, who said, look, the way to live sustainably in the world today is not to continue to escape out into the suburbs or out into the desert. It should be living in the inner city on the light rail line, 1 block from a light rail station, at 100 units to the acre. And these are family units, not singles and couples. So they demonstrate, and they live across the street from the high school, and as I said, 1/2 block from the light rail station. So once again, it's the Native American community telling the rest of us how we really should be living more sustainably in the 21st century. That's it.
Thank you, Mike. The next speaker is Loren Cohen. Loren's been manager of legal affairs for MC Construction Consultants here in Tacoma for 15 years. He's responsible for construction and development related aspects of the firm's real estate development opportunities. This has recently included Pierce County projects such as the Point Ruston development at the former Asarco smelter facility, a 100-acre Superfund redevelopment, as well as the Allen Moore Golf Course redevelopment. MC Construction is a firm that's more than 45 years old, and its projects span the entire West Coast and also the inland Northwest. MC Construction's work includes a diverse real estate portfolio, including single-family, luxury custom home subdivisions, golf course amenities, commercial office and retail projects, industrial storage facilities, hotels and casinos, and is well known for its multifamily residential projects that span for sale and also rental markets. Loren is a graduate of the University of Puget Sound and Willamette University School of Law, and he's a member of the Washington State Bar. Loren says that if not for the opportunities he's had in the real estate industry, he likely would have been a prosecutor, having spent time as an intern at the Polk County District Attorney's Office in Oregon, where he worked on crimes against women and children. Loren serves on the boards of the Tacoma-Pierce County YWCA and the Tacoma Waterfront Association, and he's also on the Chancellor's Advisory Board here at UW-T.
Thanks, Fern, and thanks, everyone, for your attention this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm no academic, just a lowly real estate developer. I did put some charts in my PowerPoint, though, so it'll look somewhat official. I like doing these sorts of things. It gives me an opportunity to kind of step back, take a pulse of myself, our organization, what we're up to in the marketplace. I find it amazing. We're talking about transit and education and wages and jobs, these really simple topics, right? No, they're extremely difficult. Housing touches these mammoth concerns in our community across the board, and I find they all relate back to these dichotomies, right? Everybody wants to be in a neighborhood or in a school district that's popular and cool, but you don't want to deal with traffic, or you want to have that lovely framed living room Mount Rainier view or view of the Puget Sound for yourself, but you don't want anybody else to have it. You want to have proximity to restaurants, but you don't want to smell the food in your living room. You want to be close to entertainment, recreation, but you don't want to hear the people or hear the movie. So there's these dichotomies and these really complicated things that all relate to our choice in housing and our choice of lifestyle that I just find fascinating. And I don't get to think about them except when I hear smart people like Mike and Michael and Steve and Ron Sims and so forth. But Point Ruston, as Fern mentioned, is the project that hopefully you've all heard of at least a little bit. This is an aerial view of most of it. It's missing maybe 20 acres or so, but it's a 100-acre site, 97 acres. We purchased in 2006 from ASARCO, American Smelting Company. They were owned by a Mexican firm called Grupo Mexico, the world's biggest mining company. They own all of the Mexican railroads. They're absolutely gargantuan. This was one of their assets. They actually bought it from the Guggenheim family way back in the day. So it's a site with a lot of history, and folks that are local here in Tacoma know the word ASARCO. It speaks to you almost inherently. You know what that means. It means pollution and cleanup and old industry, the Industrial Revolution. It also, I think, is starting to become known as Point Ruston, this project we're undertaking. So for the last 8 years, we've done some master planning and started this construction project. We're entitled to do 1,200 units, which in the context of the real estate industry is nothing. It's a drop in the bucket. In the context of Tacoma, it's huge. There have only been 1,200 units developed since 2000 in the for rent sector, for instance. We're also entitled to do 1 million square feet of retail and commercial. We've begun down that path and have a movie theater opening later this summer. Already have about 25,000 square feet of commercial space that's occupied with a plastic surgery center and a pub and cafe, and there's 4 restaurants that'll open in the next year or so. So it's moving forward incrementally, I think right in pace with the market, not slower, not faster, but right in line. But it's certainly been a long road to hoe, made more complicated by the environmental aspects, some political aspects as of late. So now onto my fancy slides. This is MLS data, Pierce County Multiple Listing Service. These are condominium sales, your average sales price in 2014. And what I'm going to do over these slides is put in context Point Ruston and the market. averages versus Point Ruston, just to show you what we're up to, what we're doing in terms of quantifiable data versus MLS data. So we've got here 2014 condo sales. Average is 181,000 a unit. We heard Steve mention 233,000 average residential across the board. So this is pure condo data. 233,000 was single family plus condo. So you'll see by the month the average is there, 150 up to just shy of 250. You add the bars on and you're looking at volumes of condo closings. 795 total condos sold in Pierce County in 2014. 40, 45 a month. Sometimes you got up to almost 90. It averaged 63 units per month. Then the scatter plot, it's dropped on there. You see the scale, it changed. The blue points relative to the bar chart in the line graph are Point Ruston condo sales. 22 closings in 2014. Somewhere around 3% of the market. But you'll see it was a different end of the market. It was the polar opposite end of like the $150,000 unit. We had $1.25 million unit, average $770,000 for those 22 units. Then the market rents, the other aspect of the Point Ruston project. When we talk about market rate, we are excluding anything with subsidy, so no Section 8. We're excluding anything owned by a housing authority like Michael's group. We're talking about pure for-profit apartment buildings. So as I mentioned, this data is from the year 2000 and currently, meaning this is about 17 projects in the downtown. You'll see market rate downtown. There's 17 projects, 1,300 units since 2000. And outside of downtown, 3 projects, 600 units since 2000. So you see the ranges there. Developers, we talk about per square foot. So in the condo slide you saw, we're averaging $450 a square foot. Tacoma, that's high. South Lake Union, that's low. It's all relative. Here you'll see the ranges for rents. Downtown market rate, about $1.25, about $1.55. Out at Point Ruston, $1.65 up to $2.39. In that market rate data for outside of downtown, it's interesting, and I think this maybe shows our company's attraction to Tacoma, Pierce County. I mentioned those are 600 units. Our company's accounted for 450 of those 600. We like Tacoma. It's not the only place we build, but Tacoma we're bullish on for a few reasons that were mentioned. It's affordable. It is proximate to transit. The transit's not great yet. It's actually not even good yet. But it is proximate to the Sounder. And we've got a lot of folks that go from Point Ruston to that Sounder station and take it up. So when Sounder 3 or whatever they're debating right now in the legislature is passed, finally, $15 billion investment, it's going to be great. It's really going to make our market accessible. There goes the affordability, but it will make our market accessible. So now you see Point Ruston, I think, relative to the context of the market, at least as reported by the MLS. Oh, one other thing I want to mention, this asterisk, market rent data provided by McCammett and Rogers. I don't know if JJ or Raylene are in the audience, but they're 2 fantastic leaders in the real estate industry here in Tacoma. They provided me this data. A little more specifics about Point Ruston and what we're doing in the for sale condominium realm. 77 total homes are offered, having either been built and sold or under construction. We total 77. It ranges from $400 to $2.4 million. So relative to the average of $181,000, quite a bit different. I'll get to why we do that, how we do that a little bit later. The size, 900 to 3,800. 3,800 is a mansion in the sky. Don't get me wrong, it's a ridiculously nice unit. It's fun to go tour and dream about living there. But there's only 2 of those. The for lease, 268 total apartment homes. So remembering that there were 1,300 units in downtown, you can see we're starting to move the needle a little bit at least about where some density in the city is found. We range from 990 up to 3,275. If you remember the slide where we talked about market rate downtown and market rate outside of downtown, we actually span the range. We tap into the lower end of the downtown and we than make the high end of the market. Our size is 600 square feet. You can have a small family, maybe a spouse and a dog in 600 square feet, up to 1,600. But 300, I agree. I wouldn't want to live there. How are we achieving 4-time multiples of the average? And this is where the entrepreneur in me and our company comes out. You can look at all the raw data in the world. You'd never can take that quantified data and make it look like this, make it look like Rainier, make it look like the waterfront, make it look like this new urbanism walkable community with amenities and gathering spaces in these pocket parks that are what are driving Point Ruston. Yes, it's a nice unit, and the mansion in the sky is phenomenal, but it's this lower picture on the right that I think tells the story. It's the Grand Plaza and these community amenities, the outside space becoming your living room as opposed to taking up 600 square feet of your home as your living room. We're trying to embrace the idea of new urbanism, walkable communities. It's something that I think was lost, or we think was lost. I think the real estate industry thinks was lost as people turn towards suburban living. That data was very interesting. People still obviously love the idea of the Canterwood Golf Course community, which if you're from out of the area, it's the maybe nicest, most luxurious single-family suburban development in Pierce County. But we see this as the next generation of living in Tacoma. It is dense. It's not quite the 80,000 per acre, whatever that data was, but we're doing a 5/2 or a 5/3, so 5 levels of housing over 3 of parking. Parking is something that also goes and shapes exactly where you can go as a community. Downtown Tacoma, no more parking standards. You literally don't have to provide parking if you're going to build a new building. That's a game changer. Out in our zoning in this North Tacoma area, we're called the S15. You have to do about a stall or a stall and a half per bedroom, or excuse me, per unit. So that's expensive. The concrete parking garage costs $30,000 a stall, so that starts to change things. So there's certainly these small zoning tweaks that you can do to manipulate your local market, but there are then these bigger macro level challenges and opportunities, frankly, that you get to focus on. So I'll just close with, I think we are, as a company, extremely proud to be part of this project. We're even more proud to be part of this community. This is our 5th project in Tacoma. Our first was in '99, right on the hill by Stanley and C4. It's not the ugly one, the good-looking one to the left. And we love Tacoma. I have projects around the area, but I choose to live in Tacoma. I am thankful for all of you students here who are going to UW-T as a board member. I think that's, it's a great opportunity, not just for yourself, but I think for our community. You'll look down here on Pacific Avenue, and if it was 15 years ago, you probably wouldn't have wanted to walk out that door. Or you'd want an escort, to watch your back. You go out there now and go to Subway and shop. It's a remarkable transition. We're excited to be part of this transition that Tacoma's going through, and I'll look forward to answering any questions that you may have later on in the program. Thanks.
Great. Our last panelist is Michael Mirra, who's the Executive Director of the Tacoma Housing Authority. And the Tacoma Housing Authority is known nationally as one of the best housing authorities in the nation. It's also been designated as what's known as a move-to-work housing authority, and I'm not going to get into the details of what that means, but it means that it can be much more innovative than the typical housing authority. So Tacoma is lucky to have that in our midst. Michael's been serving in this capacity as executive director for more than a decade, and prior to this, he was actually the general counsel at the Tacoma Housing Authority. Before joining the Housing Authority, he practiced law for 22 years with Columbia Legal Services in Washington State, representing low-income people and organizations in predominantly civil matters. And before all of that, he practiced law with Legal Services in Tennessee. His areas of legal practice have included litigation in state and federal courts, class action litigation, fair housing, growth management, federal housing programs, landlord-tenant relations, nonprofit governance, juvenile and mental health commitment, child welfare services, and child homelessness. He's a graduate of the University of Chicago and Vanderbilt Law School. Michael.
Thank you, and thank you, Ali, for inviting me. It's actually pleasant for me to participate in the Urban Studies Program Forum. Graduates of the Urban Studies program here at UW-T have thoroughly infiltrated THA. Some of them are in the audience, and I count them as the future of the agency. The Tacoma Housing Authority serves a relatively few number of lucky people. Tens of thousands of more can't even get on our waiting lists, and they write us every week. I'd like to read some of their emails. These are recent. To whom it may concern, my name is blank. I am a single mother of a 2-year-old little boy. I just finished pastry school. I got a job in a bakery. I live with my son's father's sister, who are asking us to leave. She's helping me out here, but not for longer. I want me and my son to be in a place of our own, where we can live our lives in peace and not feel like a burden. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Hello, my name is blank. I'm looking to apply for a Section 8 as soon as possible. That's rental assistance. I'm a full-time student. I take care of my 2 little sisters. I'm 20 years old. We rent a room from a friend, but we face an eviction right now. We live on TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. So DSHS gives me a choice to pay my rent here or look for a new apartment where they will pay my deposit. So I'm looking to see if I can get on Section 8 and be able to get a place so we can have a home. If you would call me, I would appreciate it. My name is blank. I'm a single mother fleeing domestic violence. I have a 5-year-old daughter. We're homeless at this time. We need help finding and securing a safe place for me and my daughter. I'm starting to work at a local hospital this week, and my daughter is starting to go to summer school. So I can work. We are couch surfing at the time. We have to leave. Can you help? Thank you, and God bless. I'm a newly single mom about to turn 34, looking to provide peace for the last 2 years for my daughter. She is 7. I need her to stay in her school. We have 2 dogs that are very important to her. I promised her that when we lose our home, we will not lose our dogs. They are small and friendly. They just race around with each other, trained and loving. I work for blank. We rely solely on what I earn. There is no help. I only net $1,052. We were living in a home that we've lost. We found a place whose owners now ask us to leave. This has not been a good situation. We are moving around a lot. Moving is draining what money we do have. We are very clean and respectful of our property and others. My daughter is my life. Providing a nice family home for her is my priority. I hope to be approved for Section 8 vouchers or any other assistance you can provide. I have no idea how to get started on this. Please help us. And finally, I am in desperate need of help. I'm a single mother of 5 children. I had problems paying my rent on the first of the month and was thrown out of the house we were renting. I believe it was because I complained about the floor being rotted away and the mold in the closets. We are now homeless. I have no money to pay last month's rent or deposit. Is there any way you can help me or send me in the right direction to get help? I'm a mom of 2 school-age boys and a baby girl. I work and go to school and arrange their childcare as I can. I desperately need assistance with rent. If you can please send me information about HUD or Section 8, that would be greatly appreciated. We are about to lose our place right now. If you can reply as soon as possible, thank you for your time. So I'd like to focus a little bit on a part of the market that was referred to perhaps obliquely in the earlier part of the day. There are various measures of this market and the need. You can, I believe Steve talked about the housing wage. The housing wage is how much money you have to earn every hour to afford a 2-bedroom apartment at HUD's fair market rent, which is calculated to be the bottom 40% of the rental market. To afford a 2-bedroom apartment at that portion of the rental market, you have to earn in Tacoma $19.21 an hour. That's about $40,000 a year. That does not include transportation costs. The mean wage of a renter in Tacoma is $13.26 an hour. A TANF family, or living on SSI, in income gets about $4 an hour, about $8,000 a year for a family of 4. Other ways you can measure this is by the number of rent burden or heavily rent burdened families in Tacoma. The city studied this in 2010. Then at the time, to meet the rent burden need among the rental markets, the city needed 14,000 more units than it had. To meet the heavily rent burdened market, it would need an additional 7,000. The future need is another 12,000 units between now and 2030. This does not account for an interesting misalignment in the market. There are a considerable number of units that would be counted as affordable, but they're not occupied by people who need the affordability. So it's an interesting mismatch that means that the assessment of need is a gross understatement. The state also came out with the most comprehensive survey of housing needs statewide. This is the State Department of Commerce, which is on their website, and I recommend it to you. We've never had such good data as that study now provides. Other measures of need would be the number of homeless households in any community. The Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction just issued its annual count of homeless enrolled public school students for last year at 32,000 statewide. That's 20% higher than in the school year of 2010 and 2011. There are many other metrics you can use. I think of it this way. If we were talking about food instead of housing, we would immediately recognize widespread malnutrition with pockets of starvation. The data is fairly straightforward about the ruinous effects this housing crisis has on almost every other civic activity: economic development, transportation, child welfare, mental health, the criminal justice system, and perhaps most poignantly, the education system. This brings me to the Tacoma Housing Authority's mission and what we think our job is. Our job starts with our vision statement. It's really our wish for the world, that everybody in it have an affordable, safe, and nurturing home, that neighborhoods are attractive places to live, work, attend school, shop, and play, and that everybody has the support they need to succeed, not just as tenants, but as parents, students, wage earners, and builders of assets. We don't have a world quite like that, which brings us immediately to our job, which is to help bring that world about in our patch of the world. And our patch of the world is Tacoma and Pierce County. And this is our job here. And I'm going to parse this because it comes in parts. The guts of our work is to provide high-quality housing to people who need it with a focus on the neediest. We do that in 2 main ways. We build, buy, and rebuild housing. We're real estate developers that we then rent. We manage our own portfolio. And we're not the largest, we're one of the city's largest residential landlords. Then we help another 3,600 households pay the rent on somebody else's housing through our rental assistance programs. That's hard work, especially since we're not funded adequately to do it. I do not count that as the harder part of our job. The world knows how to house people when it wants to. The world knows how to build housing, how to manage it, how to rent it. The world knows how to design rental assistance programs. The world doesn't know nearly enough about the next part of our job, which is how do you do that in a way that not only houses people, but gets two other things done. Helps them prosper, so their time with us is transforming and temporary, certainly for the parents, but emphatically for the children, because we do not wish them to need our housing when they grow up. And second, how do you do this work to help Tacoma develop so that, in the words of our mission statement, low-income families experience it as a place that is safe, vibrant, prosperous, attractive, and just. And the world doesn't know how to do that. What I like about THA and many people in this room is the effort to find it out. Real estate development is an important part of this work, and I'd like to close by showing you some photos of affordable developments for low-income families in this region to make the point that this is some of the best work on the market. I start with Eliza McCabe, which Mike designed on the hilltop. Guadalupe Vista by Catholic Community Services, just up the hill. International Place by Korean Women's Association. The 435 South Fawcett Apartments by MDC. This is Greenbridge and White Center by the King County Housing Authority. High Point by the Seattle Housing Authority in West Seattle. Bay Terrace Phase 1, which Tacoma Housing Authority cut the ribbon on last summer. This is Bay Terrace's community center, which has the school district's first Head Start program outside a school district building. Bay Terrace photos. This is Grandview Townhomes by the Puyallup Tribe. Falashan Gardens by American Baptist Homes of the West. And this is Falashan. Falashan has been our preoccupation for the last 10 years. Sometimes it feels like our grandchildren will finish it, but it's almost done. We can see the end of it. We tore down 200 urban acres and rebuilt a brand new neighborhood of homeowners and renters of a range of incomes, all on brand new infrastructure. And the final point I'll make about Falashan and communities like it is that they are integrated by factors that in other parts of the market are segregating factors. At Falashan, they're integrating factors: race, language, ethnicity, national origin, age, income, homeowner and renter, disability and ability. And the charm and the challenge of Falashan is to help that community live across those lines. And I'd like to close by telling you we are very optimistic. Thank you.
Wow, that was great. Thank all of you. Great panel. We started out this conversation on jobs and housing, and I think it's clear now we have jobs, housing, education, and transportation, all of which seem to coalesce in this. You can't talk about one without the other. So now I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions for this panel, and I guess everybody's lining up in different areas. Good. We have some speakers there. You want to test that and make sure that mic is on?
Testing. All right, this is a question for the audience and a comment to Mr. Runstad, I believe it is.
I wish I was Mr. Runstad.
Remind me your name again.
7 or 8
O'Connor.
zeros difference.
All right.
Steve.
This is the question for the audience, and if you could give me a response when I'm done with a 5 if you agree with me and a 0 if I'm totally off my rocker. But I think it is completely unacceptable to describe Tacoma's future as a bedroom suburb of Seattle. I do not want people to live here and work there. We are our own community. Seattle is like Vancouver, BC. It's nice, it's a great place to go for a weekend away, but it's not our problem. And it's not our job to solve their housing problems. It's our job to grow our community, which means our jobs. We have our own employment centers. We have things like JBLM. We have growing communities. We have doing other things. What I'd like to see is a great sense of entrance. We have it from the south across the Nisqually Delta. You cross something green, you come into something new. I'd like to see that in the Five Valley, cross something green and growing, come up to something new as you come up the hill. Am I right? Are we our own place? Give me a 5. If we're just another suburb in the making, give me a 0. I'm not seeing hands. 5, 5, 5, 5. Okay, thank you. Go back, try again. Think about us as our own city, not a suburb.
I think you probably misheard me, okay? Because what I said was one of the more distasteful jokes that I've heard since I've been here is the glibness to which people in Seattle will say that Seattle's affordable housing program is Pierce County, okay?
Your charts look that way too. It's okay, thanks anyway.
Well, I just don't want you to misrepresent what I've said, because I wouldn't be that insulting to anybody, particularly a large, prestigious group like this. Any good questions?
I'll try. I think of Seattle as our big suburb up north. Michael, Mira, would you be willing to do a 2-minute summary of the Mccarver project for these folks? Because the Housing Authority has done this wonderful experiment on helping to stabilize a school with a humongous turnover rate and all of the damage that goes with humongous turnover rates.
I'll spend a minute. Mccarver is a very important elementary school in Tacoma. It's on the hilltop. It's got the poorest population of students in the region, possibly the state. It's got more homeless children than any other school in the region, probably the state. It's got a student mobility rate that ranged from 100 to 179%. The data is very clear that mobility like that is destructive for school outcomes for the children who come and go and their classmates who have to sit there and watch it happen. When we finally understood that from the data, we began a year's worth of planning with the school district for something we now call the Mccarver Elementary School Housing Pilot. That we're pouring housing dollars into that school. And I'll just say that we've helped bring the mobility rate down to 75%, the cohort rate down to 3%. Reading scores are way up, earned income is up of the participating families. And we are about to conclude with the school district to make it a regular feature of the school and take it to the next elementary schools with ruinous mobility rates because of homelessness. Here's the main insight for us. The main cost of this kind of intervention is the housing dollar. We do not count that as an expense. We would be spending that housing dollar anyway, housing somebody. The challenge is, how do you spend a housing dollar not just to house someone, but to get these educational outcomes? When it works, it's a very good use of a housing dollar.
Thank you, Michael. Questions? Sarah?
Hi, Fern. Dr. Steve, I just wanted to say I love your tie. Thank you for representing us well at UW. I appreciate that.
$25 at the U store, all you can eat.
My question is kind of directed to both you and Mike. I hear a lot of the talk about affordable housing, and it's catered towards families. But then I hear your story, Dr. Steve, about your son who's in my age bracket, and he's getting engaged, and they're a dual-income household. Well, what about students that graduate with all that loan deficit, and they're single? And I haven't really heard anything about student housing around here, or how you're going to house all the singles that graduate and want to work and stay in the city.
Yeah, I think, the student debt story is, I think is one everybody can relate to. There's sometimes good reasons why, even though it might be tongue-in-cheek, people will say, my kids have finally come out of the basement. because, the debt burden is significant. So yeah, and it's no different, I think, than, what Mike was talking about, the ability on the affordable housing side. If you can build assets, if you can build equity, if you can build, then you can build self-respect, for a lot of folks who are clients and tenants of the housing authority. So, it's really a tough answer because, both my son and his fiance live in San Francisco. So they are making good money, but they're paying $3,000 a month for a small one-bedroom apartment and damn glad to get it, right? So when you have that and you have that debt burden, it really is very difficult to try and save enough money to be able to have a down payment for something. It's tough.
These are very difficult choices that my nonprofit clients and public housing authority clients have to make. There are limited resources available in these subsidy programs. The tragedy of this country is that 60% of the federal housing subsidies go to the top 20% income earners in this country, and only 20% goes to the bottom 40% who need it the most. So there are limited crumbs available, and priorities have to be set. And families with kids is usually pretty high up there, and seniors are high up there. Young folk coming out with cultural capital, a college degree, fall a little bit lower on that pecking order of what's the most that we can do with our limited crumbs. So it is painful to see. There are some actually private developers who are trying to address this problem of the new folks coming out of school with this debt and how they can possibly finding what are sort of equivalents to student housing, where you just simply accept what the young graduates are doing anyway. They're engaged in shared living arrangements, 3 or 4 sharing an apartment, except those apartments weren't really designed for that. So they're trying to design new ones out there that would make that a little bit more comfortable to pull off for people sharing the rent with the way the toilets are arranged, or kitchen facilities, and even co-housing kind of arrangements where 8 will share a kitchen and a living area as a way of reducing the cost for those who are in the predicament that you're in. I agree with Joel's earlier sarcastic comment about all these micro units. I think that's the wrong way to be going with trying to solve the problem of the young folks coming out and want to live in the city by making these 300 square foot things that they'll probably move out of in a year. But the shared living arrangements actually leave behind apartments that if a decade from now or so that pressure is no longer there, they can convert to family housing, multiple bedrooms.
Yeah, if I just could, to Michael's point there, so all the housing authorities get their funding from HUD, correct? By and large.
Our main source of capital to build with is private equity and debt.
Private equity and debt, really? So the subsidies that you get to on the operating side of all?
Operating side, our main source of income for operating is rent. HUD is our next main source. What HUD pays for primarily is our rental assistance programs.
Yeah, the Section 8 program, yeah. So here's an interesting statistic. So the president just put forth a budget for HUD this year in $47 billion, $48 billion for the next fiscal year. One of the conversations that I typically have with a lot of people when they talk about, well, gee, nobody helped me buy my home. Nobody helped me do this. Why should I use my taxpayer money to be able to subsidize somebody else? And then I turn to them, I go, well, do you own a home? And they go, well, yeah. I go, well, congratulations. I says, you're the participant and the beneficiary of the largest housing subsidy program in the history of the world. And they go, what are you talking about? I said, well, you get to write off your mortgage insurance, don't you? Yeah. Well, do you know what it cost the Treasury last year in lost revenue from mortgage insurance write-off? You know?
120 billion.
It's $118 billion, okay? HUD's budget for Section 8 rental assistance to be able to answer the letters that Michael got, $47 billion, okay? So again, you have to look at these things within the construct of where we are nationally, policy, what the priorities are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I've always found that to be a really interesting argument to have with people.
So I want to thank you guys all for being here and sharing all this information with us. My question is more geared towards Loren and Point Ruston. And I just had a question about affordability in the sense that it seems like Point Ruston is really geared towards a very marginalized market, more of the wealthier class. And even though it is a mixed-use area, I'm just curious if Point Ruston if they have intentions of affordability efforts, if there's plans on expansion on that, or how you guys are handling that issue.
Yeah, sure. I think one data point that's interesting, in our first phase, we were 4-to-1. For every one for sale unit, we had four rent units. That ratio's closer to 3-to-1 now in this next phase. I think it shows you something about when we started construction, when we came to market in terms of just the macroeconomy. There was construction dollars there for rent projects for multifamily. There's few dollars still, even today, available for condominiums. So the housing, that probably the numbers that stuck out, 2.4 million and 770,000 average, very small percentage of the units that were actually part of Point Ruston. So that's, I think, one point that's important to understand. When you look at our rental range, $990 up to the very high end. So we span in three general buckets, the three general buckets of renters. Folks looking for affordable, middle income, and high earners. Somebody that's spending $3,200 a month for rent is in the $100,000 a year segment of the marketplace in terms of their job. Somebody that's spending $990 a month is somebody, frankly, that's likely new. When you go down and look at the demographics, just check the front door. Folks that are renting are tending to skew younger, no kids, very few kids live down there. So I think the idea that they're not marginalized, they're still people with employment. It's not affordable housing, but we cover a range of housing options that's probably unique to any other project that this city's ever seen.
Here at UWT, a veteran. My wife is a teacher, a school teacher, and I have kids also. And so I just think there's a large group of people that don't really fit into either side of some of the stuff you're talking about. And because you guys are experts in the field and know, what the market is, what's available, and what is profitable, I just kind of wanted to hear your thoughts on how can we reimagine our communities through something like multi-family housing, and maybe retrofitting some of the communities that we have that are single-family homes, and allowing multi-family zoning or those sort of things to happen, and not restricting our imagination of a city, but kind of allowing those abilities for other demographics as well.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for your service. Second, I'm sure you know that there are veteran programs for mortgages and other down payment assistance that would be specific to your situation. You should investigate those. Second, I'm a big proponent of mixed income housing. So I think Point Ruston is beautiful, and there are plenty of projects like that will take advantage of certain initiatives and incentives to be able to provide a mix of income into developments like that, whether it's, tax breaks, property tax breaks, tax assistance, tax credits, et cetera, so that you get a much more integrated, robust kind of a community there. A lot of developers fight that, because they, again, it's about dollars. It's about sometimes stigma. But for instance, Seattle is not unique in the situation where they offer the opportunity for density bonuses. So they'll say to the developer, the zoning says you can build this much. But if you build this much, we'll give you that right, But in return for that right, we want, say, 20% of the units to be affordable to households earning a certain percentage of the area median income. Okay? So if you go down to some of the places that have built up quickly in Seattle, like South Lake Union, you'll see that a lot of the buildings are only 6 stories. A lot of developers never took advantage of that density bonus. And a lot of that has to do with not having or wanting to go through the kinds of machinations that you need to do in order to either comply or participate in these kinds of programs. So there's one thing about housing, and particularly affordable housing. A, it's not required anywhere in the United States. Okay? There is not a law on the books in any state in this country that says you have an obligation to do this. Okay? Even the Growth Management Act in this state has 14 goals. Okay? One of those goals is more affordable housing. We'll go enforce a goal, okay, without anything that's punitive associated with it. Okay? Second, affordable housing has been in desperate need of a champion. Okay? There is no Rosa Parks, who can sit there and you can look to and say, this is the symbol of the effort that is needed to be able to get housing into the national discussion. Now, perhaps the slide I showed where all these different cities are now talking about affordable housing, well, it's becoming a lot more conversational, because as we see incomes grow, we see what exactly you're talking about, and that's the people that are in the middle getting shut out of opportunities to be able to live close to where they work or to be able to afford more house for their families. So progress is slow, but I think we're kind of getting there. Sorry for the long-windedness.
Yeah, this is always the most difficult question that's posed to people who are doing affordable housing or market rate housing, is you're right. We're hitting this level, we're hitting that level, and there's a great body in the middle who doesn't get touched because they can't participate in the market, but their income is a little too high to make them available to, for subsidies. And I often think about what goes on in developing countries where there's a lack of ability by a government or the market sector to provide housing, and people do it themselves. We're constrained in this country by our laws, by our zoning laws, by our building codes, by our legal and by our financial institutions. It makes it impossible for people to really do self-help like we see in great numbers in the third world. It's a way of solving the problem, getting around the system. But even here, that's not an option, because the rules are making it difficult for the people in the bottom to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It's illegal.
Well, I guess how would we change those rules? Because we want rules that benefit us, right? I mean, how do we change zoning laws that are, leave all these single-family homes and say I want to build a garage with a apartment above so my brother and his kids can live there, and I'm restricted because I can't.
Right,
so
right. That's one of those battles for accessory units, for example, in neighborhoods that are single-family, trying to get the second and third unit to be permitted to be there. A lot of it is done surreptitiously. We have a house that has a second unit in it that we didn't know was illegal until the earthquake hit in '89, and we had to get it repaired, and then the building department discovered we had a second unit, and we had to get it legalized. That's throughout every city, and maybe that's the way you just have to do it, illegally.
Okay. With that comment, I'm going to close it. I had a lot of questions myself about how you move public opinion on some of these topics, but that'll be for later times. I'd like to give our panel another round of applause, and all the panelists.